Welcome back. In this video, let's get started with understanding how to handle exceptions. Let's go to our IDE and start with creating a new project. File, new project, and I would want to call this 04 exception handling and say create. I would want to open in current window and I had to currently open projects. So let's check those things up. Let's wait for the project to be set up. It should be done very quickly. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we have the project ready. And now I can create my new Python file. Control N and Python file. I would call this exception handling basics. Cool. Now we know that 1 by 0 throws, what does it do? If I run this, just type in 1 by 0 and run this, what would happen? Yep, this would throw a 0 division error. And if I click this, it would take me to the line which thrown the error. So let's say I have a variable I which has a value of 0 and j is I by, let's say 10 by I. Let's say this was some input I'm getting from a user. So 0 is not really, think as if this is not hard coded. This is actually an input you are getting from user. What would happen when I is 0? This line would throw an exception because j is 10 by 0. So this would throw an exception. Let's try a simple line of code after this. Let's try to say print j. What do you think will happen? What will be the output of this program? Executing the line, it's saying divide by 0, but you don't see the value of j being printed. The thing about an exception is once an exception happens, the execution terminates right then and there, unless you handle the exception. In this piece of code, we are not really handling the exception at all. That's why what happens is when an exception occurs in line 2, it throws the exception out and skips the other lines in the program. So even if I had 100 lines of code right here, none of those would get executed. You would see that end will not be printed at all. So when an exception happens, what happens is all the subsequent lines of code are skipped. And that's really the problem. And that's why you would want to handle exceptions. These two lines of code have a probability of handling exception. So I would want to make sure that if an exception happens here, I would give a default value to j. How can I do that? That's where the try block comes in. I can type in try colon. You would see that there's a problem in here because now you need to indent this. So I'll indent this code. And now I would be able to handle the exception. How do I handle the exception? The way you can handle the exception is by typing in something called except. So except, so the syntax is very simple, try colon, except colon. What we are saying is this piece of code might throw an exception, and if it does throw an exception, initialize j to 0. So do this code with j as 0. Let's see what would happen. What is the value of j being printed? It's being printed as 0. And you would see that end also is printed. So what we are doing in here is handling the exception. We are saying, okay, there's a chance that this code throws an exception. So if it throws an exception, then I would want to assign a default value to j. In this quick video, we looked at the basics of exception handling. We learned that if an exception is not handled, then the subsequent lines of code are not executed. What we did was we used a try block to write our code which might throw an exception, and we created an except block to say what should happen if an exception is thrown. At the end, we saw that we were able to handle the exception and continue with the code as expected. We will dig deeper into this example in the next video. Until then, bye bye.